Okay, so I'm going to put up my screen, and Trudy says we can start. So
yeah, let me just say I'm Trudy Hari from our Community Resources. I'm the Director of Individualized Support Services, and this presentation is on the Charting the LifeCourse Toolkit, where our presenter tonight is Dr. Linda Rammler from the University of Connecticut Center for
Excellence in Developmental Disabilities Research Training Service.
I have it in front of me and I just didn't get it right. I apologize.
No, you start. No, it's fine. It's just it's a horrible name. It's so long. So anyway, yes, UConn Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. We call it the UCED, UCEDD for short.
She's been working with the UConn Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities and has 46 years of experience in disabilities. And she's a plethora of knowledge and an incredible presenter. And I will turn her over to you. I will turn you over to her. So thank you.
Thank you, Trudy. So I'm hoping that I can get this slide to move, and I don't know why it's there. It is. Okay. So tonight we're going to be talking about the introduction to charting the LifeCourse framework and tools. And down at the bottom of the screen is the website for the LifeCourse, what they're now calling LifeCourse Nexus. The problem is LifeCourse Nexus, which has the banner from their webpage right now, like many human service agencies, contracted with a web designer who did not really understand some of the nuances of what they were doing. So their website right now is a little confusing. And I've been working with Shelley Reynolds, who did a talk at the very beginning of February 11th, actually, for our UCED. And I encourage any of you to go on our website. It's connucedd.org. It'll show up on the last screen. But you can listen to Shelley talk about LifeCourse. You can also listen to people talking about dignity of risk. And you can also listen to me and some colleagues of mine and some people with disabilities talk about friendships and the importance of connecting with people in their communities. So if you do go on this website, know that you may not be able to find what you're looking for just yet, but you're always welcome to contact me, and that contact information will also be on the last slide. So agenda, I think we're kind of on schedule still because I was going to do a quick overview and I've got 4 minutes to do that. And I don't know if people know how to raise their hands or anything. How many of you are family members? Are you all family members? You can put it in the chat box. Can you see if anybody's raising their hand?
We had yes, we have one that raised their hand.
Okay, is everybody else just like eating dinner and not really participating? or what? Because I'd really like this to be more interactive. I think some of you may have heard me talk, and I like to walk around and engage while I'm presenting. So I'd like to have the same kind of connection with you all. So anyway, we're reviewing the agenda. I'm going to do an overview of what Charting LifeCourse is, and we're going to talk a little bit about entitlement versus eligibility-based services and something called the ALL, because one of the things we know about eligibility-based services is that they are eligibility-based, but also based on available funding, which means there's not enough money to go around. So we as a system have to do something, and LifeCourse as a framework can really help move that in a particular direction by looking at other ways of providing services that historically have been done by organizations like MARC Community Resources, the State of Connecticut Department of Developmental Services, and so on, because those are special agencies. But what we're not saying is they're going to go away. They're not going to go away, but they'll be able to provide the supports to people who truly, truly, truly cannot have their needs be met in other ways. And that's what LifeCourse is really all about. It's thinking about other ways to support individuals. We're also going to talk about strength-based thinking because that's essential to LifeCourse. I know as a mom of 2 kids who had IEPs, and some kids who didn't have IEPs and some foster kids who had IEPs, that when you go to a planning and placement team meeting, you very seldom hear anything good. You may hear, oh, they did this yesterday. And then you get the litany of evaluations, the litany of everything that they've done wrong, all the stuff that they need to be working on because they can't do it, et cetera, et cetera. When we're looking at LifeCourse, we're going to throw that all out the window, and we're going to be looking at each individual's strengths, interests, preferences, et cetera. And we're going to use that information to develop a Charting a LifeCourse personal profile. There are a number of variations. I'm going to show you the one that I've used and tell you why we're using it. Then we're going to look at something called the LifeCourse trajectory, and I'm going to introduce you to valued life possibilities as they're defined basically by good evidence-based practice and what we know works and what is possible for people with disabilities, and something called the Integrated Services Star that can apply to anybody and can apply to any aspect of life, that really looks at having services that are flexible and available when people need them, and that nobody has to live in fear if they don't need something that they're going to lose it because it will come back for them. And that's what we're really looking for by way of systems change. And all of this, of course, is geared toward improving the quality of life of people with disabilities and their families. So that's the agenda. And you have a couple of, whoops, hang on one second. I've got to put my copy of the agenda up here so I can follow myself along. So what we're going to do is, I'm hoping that at the end of my presentation, you'll be able to do a couple things, that you'll be able to know the difference. Cursor, there you go. Okay, sorry about that. You'll be able to distinguish between entitlement-based and eligibility-based services, because that's a real critical distinction. And I also want to just spend a little bit of time busting some myths about entitlement services like Social Security supplemental income or disability income, because a lot of people think you can't really work because you lose your benefits. And that is so untrue nowadays. In fact, I just interrupted a conversation and said, that's not true. So I want to cover a little bit about that when we get to some of the things about employment. Hopefully you'll be able to give examples of deficit versus strength-based thinking, because that's really what you want to do. And if you were in a live workshop with me right now, I would have you write down on a piece of paper every negative thing you've heard about a person with disability that you care about, and then crumple it up and chuck it, and I would send it through the shredder, because we really have to get away from thinking about that if we're going to be looking at valued life outcomes. You'll know the purpose of the LifeCourse trajectory, which is similar to some of the other person-centered planning processes that you may have been involved in, but it's also different in a very good way. Not the least of which is you don't have to have it on a big wall sheet that you roll up and then stick in your closet and forget about forever. It's a living, breathing document that you can go back to. It can become part of any type of information that's provided. If you have in-home services and somebody's new, that you can hand this to them and they'll understand where you're heading, where you want to go, who this person is in terms of their strengths, et cetera. And then you're going to be able to define and give examples of the 5 components of what we actually, it should say integrated support star. I apologize for using old language here, but it's an integrated support star, because we really want to get away from the idea of services, because services sounds like you're providing a service to somebody like a car. And what we really want to look at with the model and the way that we're heading with LifeCourse planning and person-centered thinking is that we want to support individuals. We don't want to be the gurus that come in and do to them, but we want to support them in doing what they want to do for a good life. And then obviously the last thing would be identifying what a good life looks like. So just a little bit about where I come from. If I don't do this, I get fired. So this is what Trudy had difficulty pronouncing, the Yukon Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. Our vision is that Connecticut citizens with disabilities, note that it does not say with certain types of disabilities or with only mild disabilities. It says with disabilities have opportunities and supports that allow them to be valued, fully included, independent, productive, and contributing members of society. I'm going to be very harsh about some things that are not really considered inclusive opportunities because, as Trudy said, I've been around for 46 years. And that means I started my career at Hartford Regional Center and then at Mansfield Training School. And we thought things like group homes were the best thing since sliced bread because they got people out of an institutional setting. And the reality for too many people, and I'm not accusing Mark of this, or I'm going to use Mark for short. I know there's another Manchester art that calls itself Mark. I'm not accusing Mark of doing this, but there are too many people today living in group homes who are really living in mini institutions. And a specific example I'll give of that is somebody that I went to visit because he and I use a different form of communication. And I went to visit him at dinner time. And I was told by the staff that I had to leave because he had to eat dinner because DDS wanted to have family style dinners. And he had something to say about that. He stood up and he slammed his hand into the wall because he wanted to interact with me. And that was an institutional interpretation of family style dinners. So that he's living in a group home. He's living with two other gentlemen, but it is a mini institution, the way they interpret the rules there. So I'm pretty negative about that stuff. And I'll also tell you why. Sheltered workshops and things that some of us call day wasting programs, because we really want Connecticut people with disabilities to honor what we are. We're an employment first state, even though we didn't get federal money for it, but we're an employment first state with our goal being that everybody can work and everybody should work. And that just because you have a disability doesn't mean you should sit around collecting SSI and not being a productive citizen and contribute as a member of society. Does that mean everybody can work tomorrow? No. Realistic to know, I've spent many, many years working with job development kinds of efforts, and I know how difficult it is in Connecticut, especially with the economy pre-COVID, to have everybody in competitive integrated employment. But we've got to think that that's the long-term goal for everybody. And so what we at the USED do is we disseminate knowledge and skills by translating evidence-based research into policy practice and interdisciplinary learning opportunities. And we specifically focus, and this is under post-secondary options and community supports. So that's who we are. And on a national level and all the things that tie into LifeCourse, everything on this ties into LifeCourse, from early intervention through end of life, because it really is a planning tool for every transition throughout life. It's not just the transition from school to adult services or from adult services for people who are kind of middle-aged to people who are older and elderly and would otherwise be retiring. It's really every single transition, of course, across the life course. And that includes things like inclusion, inclusive education, inclusive community living, that's supported. Self-advocacy and self-determination is a huge piece of LifeCourse. Using assistive technology to enable people to be independent. And we know from some of the work that some of the nonprofits in Connecticut are doing that if you provide somebody with assistive technology, they could move out of a group home setting and live in a place of their own to call home. And if you haven't seen the little clip about a man named Raymond Crease on Channel 8 News, which was many years ago, actually maybe 5 years ago, I'll send Trudy the link to it and you guys can watch it, because Ray needed to be in a group home because of his complex medical needs. And when they set up his environment in such a way that he didn't need to have somebody there on site because he had the pull cord, he was able to communicate with his case manager through Skyping. In those days, we didn't really use Zoom yet. And all sorts of devices that would turn things off or let his case manager know if he forgot to close the door and everything else, that he's able to live independently. And he's still living in that apartment all these years later. Yet he was costing the state some $25,000 a year then, in those days, dollars. So there's lots of things that we can do if we're looking at things like assistive technology. Everything we also do is family centered, but we also kind of draw the line that once you're an adult, you should be doing as much things like every other adult as you possibly can. Your parents are there to support you, but your parents should only make decisions that are that are what you think are in your best interests. And that's a should. That's a should when you're talking about adults, because sometimes, and I see this a lot with parents who don't want their kids working, because sometimes it's because they think of the myth that they're going to lose their benefits, which again is not true. You always make more money if you're working than if you're not working, or they may not see their adult child as being capable of working. And we have plenty of examples of people who no one thought could do anything, who are in fact working. They're running their own businesses, or they're contributing in some other way to an employment situation through something called customized employment. We're not going to talk a lot about that today, but it is something that we will be addressing, and the USED is going to have a lot of information about that. Child abuse and neglect is not really our forte, but we do work with DCF on life course planning, school to work transition, supported living and employment I already mentioned, and so forth. So that's how we contribute on a national level, and we are all members. Every USED, there's 2 states that have 3, New York and California, and there's a couple states that have 2. Every other state and territory, like Connecticut or Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, has 1 USED per territory. We all operate under something called the DD Act, and that's why LifeCourse is so meaningful to us, because it embraces person-centered planning in a way that is so consistent with what we believe and what we need to do because of our federal funders. And that's to assure that individuals with developmental disabilities and their families participate in the design of and have access to needed community services, individualized supports, and other forms of assistance that promote self-determination, independence, productivity, integration, and inclusion in all facets of community life through culturally competent programs. I think more recently we're using the term programs that acknowledge with cultural humility the fact that they don't necessarily know everything about other cultures, but we want to make sure that we're sensitive to the fact that people from different cultures have different ways of looking at things. So I may have already angered some of you by some of the comments that I've made, and I apologize for that, but that is, again, what LifeCourse is to work toward true independence and inclusion, true supported independence, interdependence, supported dependence for everybody, and in full inclusion in their community in all aspects of life. So you may have seen some of these person-centered plans. Like I said, the big things that we used to do on the wall. I've been doing person-centered planning since 1985, where I followed Beth Mount, who was one of the originators of something called, what did she call it? I can't remember, it was so long ago, positive futures planning. And that was my first foray into using large wall sheets to get a team together and really plan in those days to get people out of institutions. And we've used it to facilitate through maps inclusion in public schools. And we've used PATH for other aspects of life, including some organizations. And they sort of look like this. Here's a young man standing next to his PATH very proudly because it's got what he's going to do by a certain year. And then they work backwards. That's great, except like I said, hindsight is 2020. And we know that these forms of person-centered planning often end up rolled up and stuck in a closet somewhere. And even if they were typed up, they weren't really included in the planning that happens around individual plans that are based on levels of need, ones, and that really drive not having a stagnant life, but having one where we are all constantly developing and growing and achieving new things that are good for us and that really fit what we want to do as human beings. There's another thing that DDS had bought into for a while called essential lifestyle planning. I don't know if anybody was a victim of having to use this. And I say a victim because it was so academic and not user-friendly. Charting the life course is very, very user-friendly. So I'll start to show you that in a second. One of the things that I said we were going to talk about was strength-based planning, and I'm only strength-based thinking rather. It's a real shift from those previous methods that focused on diagnoses, deficits, and the disability itself. What was wrong with the person, what needed to be done to fix them, or because we didn't really understand how to support them to make sure that they were protected in a way that they weren't able to have a good life because people were not allowing what we call dignity of risk. What strength-based strength-centered planning, strength-based person-centered planning looks at is what does the individual have to offer? Everybody has a gift, whether it's a smile, whether it's a look in their eyes, whether it's something that they can do with a head switch if they have the technology that they're entitled to have. What kinds of interests do they have? What kinds of resources and capabilities? And those are what we all need to focus on with charting the life course. So we really have to get rid of all the stuff people can't do, even if it's negative. And I'll tell you how we deal with that in a few minutes, even if like behavior challenges and so on come into play. We assume that every person, every individual, emphasis added, regardless of their history or problems that they experience, has abilities, personal qualities, achievements, wants, wishes, dreams, and aspirations for his or her life, just like anybody else, regardless of their disability. And that we also believe the individual is the expert in knowing what they need and want, and in identifying how their needs and wants can best be met. And that came out of the University of North Carolina Institute for Best Practices a long time ago. It wasn't dated, but it was a long time ago. I've been using this for many, many years. And again, strength-based person-centered planning is not something that's necessarily caught on. And I know that even some DDS case managers sit at the IP meetings and say, you've got to make your son or daughter sound out to be worse than they really are, because otherwise their lawn's going to change and you're going to get less money. Life course planning is to avoid that. As we move toward a system, and DDS has bought into this as a system, we're using this as a way to not ever have to say that to a family, and to not ever make anybody think that they have to take what's being offered to them, because we know square pegs don't fit into round holes. We also know that individuals with disabilities don't necessarily fit into what the state has been paying for by way of a particular waiver category, that there needs to be some flexibility in there. So what is charting the life course all about? It's a framework. It does have a set of tools, but those tools are part of the framework to get to where you want to go. And as I said before, it's for individuals and families of all abilities, all ages. And the ultimate point is to develop a vision for a good life and to make that happen. And a good life is as it's defined. It's not something people settle for, like, well, at least they've got a day program from 9 to 3, so they're not in the house during those times. Or at least they've got a roof over their heads because they can't live at home anymore. But really having what it is that somebody wants. So for me, housing is a place of your own to call home. What you do during the day should be, you're either sleeping because you're working second or third shift and you have the supports you need to be able to do that, including transportation, or you're working like everybody else. And if you can't work, or you don't want to work, or you're too old to work, you have meaningful things to do during the day. And I'll show you the difference between a schedule without life course and a schedule with life course planning. So we also want people to, this whole thing is a guide about what you need to learn and what you need to do to make a good life happen, to identify how to find and develop supports. One of the things I'm not covering, and that life course out of the University of Missouri at Kansas City is actually taken from Connecticut, which I'm proud of, is incorporating the social connections piece of how you get to where you need to be. What that has, that friendship component, and that thing I told you about that I'll send Trudy the link to, talks all about some of the mechanisms for doing that. And Life Course has included that, but I don't have time in my hour and a half today to tell you all about that good stuff. But there are things that families can do to help build social connections. And I know that I'll show you how the service system has basically prevented that in a few minutes. We want you to discover what it takes to live lives that people want to live. And we use it for building a great life. So we've got a whole series of building a great life webinars right now because we can't do face-to-face. There will be a conference. We thought it was going to be doing it at the Farmington Marriott, but for anyone who hasn't heard it yet, they're closing, and it's not going to be a hotel in the future. So we have to find a new place to do that. One of the things that I said before that Life Course is, it's really looking at it, it's a universal strategy for transformational change in how we do supports for people. I'm not even going to call them services, but supports for people. We have to embrace the all. In Connecticut, the eligibility specific supports through DDS, for example, are only provided to about 25% of the population of individuals with intellectual disabilities. That's 75% of people who are either already on the waiting list or whose families are, quote, making do without DDS services. There's going to come a time that they're going to need some sort of services that they may not be getting. Even if you're living independently in the community, there are times in your life where you need those services. Right now, the question is whether or not they're available is dependent on whether or not DDS has the funds to add you to the caseload. Or in the case of an emergency, if something happens to the family, your son or daughter as an adult may end up, if they're not already in a residential, community residential situation, they may end up in a group home or community residential alternative way far away from your community. So if you take those individuals to church, if you take them out shopping in the community and they're known by people in the places that you frequent, they're going to be somewhere where nobody knows them, because that's the best DDS can do, as long as we're tied to eligibility specific supports based on what amounts to a first come, first served situation. There are some public-private partnerships that we definitely want to capitalize on, but we want to make sure that those are not necessarily geared toward people with disabilities. So a number of those situations where families are making do have other arrangements with other resources. So they're not necessarily using DDS-specific services, but they may, for example, be working with their faith community, or they may be working with like the parents may have connections to Rotary Club or Kiwanis or whatever. And some people there have offered to hire their individual at a competitive integrated employment situation, which means they're getting minimum wage or better. And that's how they're working. They're not using a service agency like Mark Community Resources in order to accomplish some of the things that they want for a good life. But those public-private partnerships are also very fragile because they're not systematic. And then again, there's the community and society. So when we look at embracing the all, we want to make sure that resources are available to everybody in this triangle, the 75% who are not currently using. And it's a guesstimate. We don't actually have real data on that because we haven't knocked on doors and done a census of people who have intellectual developmental disabilities. We know people who self-identify as having a disability because of the census, but that's a much broader definition than what we use in Connecticut for eligibility-based services. So another way to look at the visioning for the future is if you think about what the late Dr. Martin Luther King said. He said, I have a dream. He did not say, I have an annual plan and quarterly goals and objectives. You can turn LifeCourse information into an annual plan and quarterly goals and objectives if you do it the right way. And that's doing strength-based, person-centered thinking about what can we do about the individual that we know, and how can we build on the strengths, interests, preferences, qualities, everything else that people know and like about them, and that they can offer to the community at large. Because like I said, everyone has something to offer. Here's the unintended consequences of the traditional deficit model. We used to have an individual surrounded by their family, surrounded by the community. Now, granted, what happened when that wasn't in place was that people got shipped off to segregated institutions. We're trying to get rid of all of those, obviously, although we've not had a whole lot of success with one of them in Connecticut, which I'm very proud of People First because they've really taken that on as a cause. People First being a self-advocacy group. But what happened when we started to develop human services, we wrapped around the individual and we told families, you no longer have the expertise. I'm the special educator, I'm the occupational therapist, I'm the physical therapist, I'm the psychologist, I'm the professional, I'm part of the service system, and you don't count anymore. Yeah, you can sit at the table with us, but you really don't have any expertise at all. That is so untrue. You have expertise, you know your sons and daughters, you have to be part of this whole process of charting a life course. We also took a service system and we wrapped it around a family. So how many families have lost connections with extended family members, with people they used to meet after work because they're schlepping their son or daughter to all sorts of therapies or special this or special that, instead of having them included in a community-based thing because we've built all these siloed special services. So we've blocked the family from being part of the community too. And we have to get rid of that. So the model that we're really looking at is services available where and when needed. And you can see all these are integrated service stars, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but you can see where the majority of these, I don't know if you, I hope you can tell that the stars are primarily in the community and around the family. There's very little that's around the individual because the supports come from the family and the community. And the individual may still need to learn some skills or may still need to figure out what it is that they want out of life because they haven't really had a lot of exposure. So that's where some of these service stars focus on the individual. But our system really needs to focus on including those people in our society, which means that the people who have to change are us as service providers, us as family members, and I am a family member, us as those who surround the individual so that the individual can have the quality of life that they deserve because we deserve it and they deserve it. So not embracing the traditional deficit model leads to exclusion, where we ignore or hide the differences, where we focus on fixing somebody. We control and manage. I gave you that example of the group home. We do things for people that they can't do for themselves. The balance of power belongs with us as the caregivers or caretakers, and we have this whole notion that they must be protected. So examples we say things people perseverate or fixate on. How about persevere? Really seem to like or be interested in. They display attention-seeking behavior. Don't we all? Wants to have relationships with. Frequently off task or avoidant, is non-compliant. How about takes breaks to regroup or expresses disinterest independently? No self-control. How about has survived? Because if you don't have self-control, you're expressing pretty great dissatisfaction. You're also self-advocating. If you're dependent on others and you can't do this, we can restate that by saying somebody does best when supported for. So an example of somebody that I know pretty well, she does best when she's supported for things like fastening her clothes, which means one of two things. She either needs adapted clothing, which is a form of assisted technology where she doesn't have to do the fasteners, or she needs some sort of support, which doesn't necessarily have to be her family. It could be a roommate who does not have a disability, who could help her with fasteners because she can do the rest of the dressing by herself. So instead of saying she can't dress herself independently, she can dress herself independently with support for fasteners. For fastening. You hear the difference with that? It's a really strength-based, positive way of thinking about it. A short attention span knows what she or he likes and is able to change their mind. Splinter skills, not splinter skills anymore. Let's look at talents. Let's look at people who are really good at certain things and has a lot of problems, including but not limited to, and then that whole litany of deficits and what the person can do. How about being smart in ways others don't always recognize? And one of the things, just quick story, when I was first starting to do inclusion consulting, I was working with an 11-year-old who was in a horrible preschool type placement in a middle school where she was totally segregated from everywhere else. And they were still doing preschool type curriculum, like what's the weather like today and those kinds of things. And I went to home because I always observe people in more than one environment. And I saw her come in, hang up her book bag, hang up her coat, go to the kitchen, open the refrigerator, take out the snack, and come into the living room. And I'm thinking, wow, if my kids could just do that, that's pretty cool for an 11-year-old. And then she goes and gets a video and she shows it to her mom. And her mom says, not now, because it's one of those things that a little questionable stuff where maybe you wanted to fast forward, at least hold them tight because it was scary or violent or whatever. So she goes to turn on her TV, and of course her mother said, why don't you watch some show like Mr. Rogers or something like that? Or it was a benign show, or Reading Rainbow, I think it was. And so she goes to turn it on and the TV doesn't work. So what does she do? She walks around behind the TV to see if it's plugged in. How many of us actually do that? How many of us start banging on the TV first and then realize maybe we should look to see if it's plugged in, or maybe to see if there's a battery in the remote? She knew to do that. And then what she did, because this was back in the day of VCR, she deprogrammed her brother's show that had been set for 4:00 so she could watch TV, because you weren't able to multitask on your TV and your VCR in those days. What incredible strengths. And yet, if you looked at what the school saw in her, if you looked at what the service provider saw in her, it was somebody who couldn't even make it through a preschool curriculum because she didn't know the answer to what's the weather like today. We need to be looking at other things that people can do and what their other strengths are. So now I'm going to go into the one-page personal profile, which looks at basically 3 things. And I'm going to show it up here so you can see the blue rectangle on the top, I hope. Trudy, feedback, can you see the blue rectangle on the top? I'm assuming everybody else does. So that blue rectangle is where you list what people admire about you and what your strengths are. And it can be things like people admire I'm handsome. People admire the fact that I am able to tell them no when I don't want to do something by pushing a plate away because I'm not interested in eating that. It may be that your strength is that you are really detail oriented and you can pick up little tiny things on the floor that nobody else notices. I'll tell you something, our high-tech industry in Connecticut is really excited about people who can do that. They're really excited about people who can see little teeny tiny things that are wrong with a product that they're developing because it means more money for them. It means that that electronic device goes out to a consumer and doesn't get returned because it's going to work. Because somebody who has that eye for minutia picked it out and said, nah, this little thing is off. People can be taught to do that. Even people we didn't think could learn to do skills. The green square on the bottom is what's important to somebody and what their preferences, interests, and passions are. We got to be careful about that because sometimes people act like it's their passion or their interest because they really don't know about more things, but it's still what we think we know. The kind of orangey square is how best to support me. So how best to support me is to give me a choice to do this, give me some time to process what you asked me to do, give me a visual schedule. Those are kinds of things that are best ways to support somebody to facilitate independence. Have my iPhone programmed to know when my break time is so I don't keep bothering you asking me when my break is. Little kinds of things. Those are ways to support somebody. We included the right hand, the long rectangle that's kind of pinkish, mauve colored. What does not work for me because I was working with a number of people who had some pretty significant trauma issues and who needed crisis-informed interventions, which is you don't punish. You help de-escalate the situation, you wait hours sometime, and then you go back and reteach how it could have been handled differently, and you try to help the individual to recognize what the trigger was so that they can avoid it or walk away from it if they can't avoid it completely, and also to recognize when they're escalating, because people tend to escalate from 0 to 60 in a nanosecond, but there's always a little tiny bit there if somebody can recognize their own breathing rates going up and so on. So we wanted to put what does not work for me for those individuals because I dubbed it red shirt syndrome, somebody who literally could not tolerate any staff wearing a red shirt because the guy who murdered his mother in front of him was wearing a red shirt. He had a traumatic physical reaction that resulted in furniture breakage, walls being punched in, et cetera. So what does not work for me, please don't wear a red shirt if you're going to be working with me or even in my general vicinity. But this is a one-page profile. How great is it to have all this information on one page that if Trudy's going to be working with me as somebody new, somebody can just hand it to you, Trudy, and you can see what my strengths are. You can see what you can build on. You can see what my preferences and interests are, so you know how to develop a relationship with me. You know how best to support me already, so you don't have to spend how many weeks trying to get to know me, and you know what doesn't work, so you can avoid those things. And we'll have a good relationship right away, and I'm going to be more responsive to you. That makes a whole lot of sense. And that's the beauty of this one-page profile. I'm telling you right now, Charting the Life course does not have this up anymore. They have a link to 100 different types of forms that you can use. DDS, I'm pretty sure, is still using this form minus the pink column. Is that correct, Trudy?
Similar.
Do you know that?
Yes.
Okay. So, but I would say, again, if you have somebody who's got trigger issues because of their past, you want to make sure that people don't aggravate them. Because you can't live a good life if you're constantly anxious or constantly on edge or people are constantly triggering you because they don't know what triggers you. So I think that's important information for some people to have. Notice it's thinner and it's off to the side. So the main part of the one-page profile in Charting Life course is what's the good stuff, what's important, and how best to support. The next section, this is just an example of one that's been filled out. It was filled out on my son. talking about he's tall and handsome. He's read almost every book in the Wesleyan Library. He's very creative. When he was younger, he built a sister trap with exploding pencils, those kinds of things. Really knew his way around San Francisco. What's important to him was cooking, freedom, spirituality, loved to study different faiths. How best to support him was tell him and show him, don't hand him written instructions, keep calm, speak softly. Let him call me, his mom, if he needs to. Let him walk away if he's frustrated or upset. I still remember getting a call from one of the vice principals at his high school saying, Mrs., using my ex-husband's last name and his last name, Tim's AWOL again. I'm like, what do you mean he's AWOL? She says, well, he's on the other side of the field. And I'm like, what do you mean he's on the other side of the field? And she said, well, he's AWOL. He's supposed to be in class. And I said, well, have you read his IEP? It says he needs a break. Did you check with anybody else in the office to see if he was given a pass to not be in class? If you don't want him in the field, then somebody maybe should just gently go out. But I don't need a phone call for this because he's debriefing. He's getting himself out of a situation where he's going to blow it if you keep getting in his face. So, just so you know, I have a lot of experience with this kind of stuff personally as a mom and as a professional for many, many years. So now we're going to get into the life course trajectory. So what I would love for all of you to do is access, and I can send you copies, Trudy, so people can download it and fill out a fillable form where you're really looking at the person you care about most and the reason you're here tonight, and be able to fill out what's good. And don't put negative stuff there. You're forbidden. I'm telling you now, you're not allowed to put negative stuff there, period. Okay? And Trudy's going to somehow find out. She's going to send it to me, and you're going to get a phone call saying, why did you put that down? I'm joking, but I don't want anything negative on there. You have to figure out how to describe the person you care about in only positive terms, including what they can do with support. Can get ready for the day with support for every part of their morning routine. That's okay. You're describing somebody who obviously has very significant physical disabilities, but they can get ready for the day with that level of support. You're telling what the level of support is, but you're not expressing it in negative terms. What we have tended to do in our field, aside from wrapping around individuals and separating them from their families and wrapping around families and separating them from their individuals, is we've had an all or nothing view. We've had the wrong view is that you can and you should and will be allowed to, or you can't like everybody else, and therefore you should not and won't be allowed to. The right view is that the more support you need, the more support is provided. So the more you get into people with significant disabilities who can't, the more support might be needed and has to be available and accessible when they need it. So it's a different model. The right view is this: if you don't need a whole lot of supports, you don't need a whole lot of supports. You don't get the supports just because you're a DDS accepted individual. What is Lons 1 through what? 4 now are not getting funded? Lons 1 through 3, I know for sure aren't getting funded. Did they add 4 to it?
I don't honestly know.
But so they may not need support right now, but I can guarantee you there's going to come a time when somebody loses their job or their family has changes in it, that they're going to need some level of support. Right now, they're in that part of the all where they're not going to be able to get it. Or if they do, it's not going to be what they want. They're going to end up in something in another part of the state. So we don't want to have this wrong all or nothing view. What we want to do is we think everybody can do everything everybody else does if they have the support that they need. And that's fundamental to the life course trajectory. So what we want to look at is roles of past experiences that can be helpful. So those are successes or accomplishments, people that you've met along the way who really liked you, places you've been, skills you've learned, books you've read, experiences, discoveries. Those types of things are things that can lead to a good vision. Past experiences that get in the way are if you've been bullied, if you've been mistreated, if you've had other abuse, neglect, or trauma, if you've lost important people in your life, which people do because we don't pay people who provide direct care enough money to stay, and we don't provide hours that are flexible enough for them to meet their needs for family. I know that there was a big exodus of some people when we raised the minimum age. I don't know if Mark was affected by this, but there was an exodus of great staff when we raised the minimum wage for direct care workers to $15 an hour because There were places that would pay the $15 an hour, but had like 15 minutes less on their shift. And people went to those other jobs because that made the difference between paying more for childcare or not, and really benefiting from that that raise, that increase that they got. I also know that a lot of managers ended up quitting because they were getting the same rate as the direct care workers in some of the agencies. So those are policies that are made by people who don't get it. We really have to make sure that people get it with this. Low expectations, failures, all these other kinds of things can lead to the kind of vision for life that we don't want to have. So LifeCourse really focuses on what is your vision for a good life. I know what my vision for a good life is at my age. My vision is that I'm going to be able to retire. I'm going to be able to spend more time with my grandchildren. I'm still going to be able to dabble in what I've loved doing for the last 46 years, getting in trouble, doing trainings, doing these kinds of things, spend a little more time at the legislature so I can make sure that they don't do stupid things, and helping them realize what really needs to be done to support people and families in the community and so on. What I know doesn't lead to that is the fact that I have to still work for the state for a long time because I left the state at 9 years, 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days, and I lost the 5 months, 1 week and 3 days that would have gotten me vested. So I'm back at the state now trying to earn back some retirement, and now I understand next year before I'm allowed to retire that may not happen because who knows? Anyway, those are things that are not leading to my vision. Those are things that are standing in my way. So I've got to pay close attention. One of the things I learned through LifeCourse, what I need to know is I need to pay really close attention to what's happening with state retirement because I've been in private practice for many, many years. I have IRAs, but my goal was that my state, the paltry bit I'd be eligible for from the state retirement would actually cover my insurance for healthcare because my husband and I both have pretty significant healthcare needs. So that was what I was thinking. That was my vision for a good life. Who knows? We'll see. But part of what I know I need to do in the future, and that's what you've got the past and the future things, is I need to stay on top of that. So I even use this trajectory for me in terms of what I need to do to get to the vision that I want for my future and what I don't want in my future. Okay, where are we with time? Oh, perfect. We finished at 6:55. Yay, I'm wondering. Okay, so what we want to talk about now, according to our agenda, it's going to be Introduction to Valued Life Possibilities, and then the Integrated Service Star. This is something you're not going to be able to see here, but it is, and I'll send Trudy the page that it's on if I can find it, because I did find it the other day. And what I'm really thrilled about is that the University of Missouri at Kansas City that developed Charting the LifeCourse tools took what we did in Connecticut and they put a line at the bottom. And a line at the bottom, underneath that line are things that are not considered best practice and do not lead to an inclusive, fully integrated, self-determined, self-directed quality of life that is what anybody else might want. There are things that stifle that. So we want to make sure that when we're looking at LifeCourse options, we're exploring life possibilities that are very creative and above the line. So now I'm going to go into the bigger thing, which hopefully you can see. So if we look at daily life and employment, that really has to do with what a person does as part of everyday life, whether it's school, employing, volunteering. People communicate all day long. They've got routines, life skills, and so on. Some of the more creative things that we're doing right now are entrepreneurship opportunities. That works really, really well for people who have a chunk of their day that's devoted to personal hygiene and life care, or that maybe because they have behavioral challenges have to kind of exit stage left for a time being. Micro enterprises is something that we haven't really explored in Connecticut, but it's where you basically have a small board constructed of maybe your parents, maybe your sister or brother, maybe somebody like Trudy, maybe somebody like me, and you actually own your own business. And you do things with your business, and the micro board helps support you in doing those things. People have careers. People have competitive employment where they're earning minimum wage or better, and they're getting benefits, and they've got opportunities for promotion and so on. Customized employment is something that's not really new, but it's a different way of looking at employment, that instead of going to an employer and saying, would you please hire Trudy because she's so cute and she really needs a job and it would just be the right thing to do, which we did in Connecticut for a really long time. And now a lot of employers are kind of turned off about hiring people because I might have gone in with her as her job coach and I might have done the job for her or stood in the way of her interacting with coworkers, or I may have chatted with coworkers when I shouldn't have been, et cetera, et cetera. That customized employment is really where you're developing a job that meets the needs of an employer and the needs of the individual. So one of my favorite examples of customized employment was somebody who didn't speak, wasn't even really toilet trained, used a communication device. And we discovered in our transition work with him that he could use a computer task analysis on his iPad. And I've got a lovely video of him kind of thumbing through the iPad to figure out how to do one of the steps that he needed to do, which involved fine motor skills that he didn't have in any other situation. We also temporarily left him because the person who was supporting him needed to use the facilities, left him for a few minutes and came back and discovered that he had copy typed all the papers around him on the computer. Who knew he had the skill? Nobody knew he had the skill. He's now working in an accountant's office in a customized job that was literally cut and designed for him because our job developer went to a number of companies and found one accounting firm where there was a pileup of stuff. Their supply room was a mess. By the way, this guy was a very neat person and liked things ordered, and who basically, they spent all the time doing the sneaker delivery, like somebody would walk from one side of the office to give something to somebody else. These are all things he could do. He could also copy type. So if somebody had something that needed to be replicated, that they had scanned and it needed to be copied so they could edit it or whatever, he could do those kinds of things. So they developed a job spec with the owner of the accounting firm specifically for him. And the last time I checked, he was making close to $20 an hour, working 3 full days a week, and was part of their social group after work because they really liked him, nonverbal, all this. They liked him, so they bring him along because he's 25 now, so he can go into bars and stuff. They bring him along on their social events and they invite him to their family events and so on and so forth. What a different life for somebody whose mother was told he had to be put in an institution because he wasn't going to amount to anything. That's what customized employment is all about. We have to dream big. We have to stop thinking people are limited because of their disabilities. Supported employment, going to college. We have a Think College model in Connecticut and 3 different institutions of higher education for people with intellectual disabilities. All sorts of things are opening up. What we don't want to be looking at are sheltered workshops, day habs, work crews or enclaves because people get sub-minimum wage there, or special colleges or transition programs where they're not allowed to be included with everybody else. So that's one of the life opportunities that we want everybody to be exploring. We also want for community living things like co-housing, livable communities, universal design, having attendant care, somebody to come in and do the things you need done when you need them, but doesn't necessarily have to be there 24/7. Adapted living space, environmental technology. I already mentioned that smart home. People can have shared living. There are ways to, supposedly we're going to be investing in public transportation in Connecticut.
That would be wonderful. And I just want to interrupt real quick because there's a comment in here going back to the micro enterprises. It says WIOA, W-I-O-A, which is a nationwide funding, has grants for micro enterprises. And if anyone is interested, you can go to WorkSource Centers or AJCC American Job Centers for that information.
And our workforce, in our centers that do that in Connecticut, our AGCs, depending on where you live, and I don't know if Middletown is in the New Haven area, if it's in the Hartford area. If you're in the Hartford area, and I truly don't know how far south that goes, but Capital Region Workforce Council is very good about understanding all these things. The AJC in New Haven is trying. But if you're in somebody else's catchment area, they may not have a clue about how to work with people with disabilities. So that is there, but that's where using your advocacy skills as a family member, your advocacy skills as staff, or the person you're supporting's advocacy skills as a self-advocate come into play to help them realize what they need to do to not be discriminatory, because otherwise they're in violation not only of WIOA, but of the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which was passed in 1973. Really should have been implemented by now. So I think people need to know that they have to do these things and that they can do these kinds of things. And so I'm working with a lot of community leaders around how to, and actually you're director of, I don't know what you call day services. I forgot her name.
Probably employment and Lorianne Hoberman.
Nope, it's DeFelice.
Oh, and then it is Day. It is Day, and it's Amber DeFelice. Yes.
Amber DeFelice is going to be coming to the one for providers, so she's going to be hearing about how to do all this stuff and how to really help Mark move forward in this direction, because it's not abandoning. I don't want anyone to think for a second it's abandoning people. It's making their lives better, and it can and has been done. I have total faith in it. I've seen it be done. Unfortunately, in Connecticut, we have a lot of old school thinking, and we have a lot of silos where, day services, Mark provides both residential and day services. So there's some degree of overlap there, but there are some places that only provide one or the other. And so individuals don't even get the same policies and procedures on a day-to-day basis. And that affects the quality of their life. So we have to figure out how to make it more individualized and make it personalized and so on for them. So moving on with, whoops, I got the cursor in the wrong place. We also want to make sure, like I said, that people have opportunities for socialization and spirituality. I know Mark had a community garden on top of the health center at one point, which was way cool. I don't know if you're still doing that, but those are the kinds of things that I think are awesome. And the more people can be engaged, including in dating and relationships, using unified sports is wonderful, because Amber is going to be in with Bo Doherty from Connecticut Special Olympics, who's also very invested in making sure that communities meet recreational needs in an inclusive fashion. So all of these kinds of things for social and spirituality. What we want to get away from is separate, because Brown versus Board of Education, 1956, separate is not equal. And all these special activities. I'm not saying we're going to eliminate them altogether, but we want to make sure that they're not being used as a substitute for being fully included in the community. We want to maximize all opportunities we have for full community inclusion. Same with healthy living. We want people to have gym memberships. We want them to use community health centers, not special providers that only specialize in people with disabilities. People should have family practice providers. And that was a huge initiative that I worked on with Connecticut Special Olympics, to make sure that we did have community health centers that were receptive to people with disabilities being part of their patient population. I'll use the term patient because it's healthcare. And one of the things that I can tell you with customized employment, this is also something from WIOA, that when you do customized employment or you do competitive integrated employment, it ties in with what the Social Security Administration has, is a couple of different work incentive programs. Social Security does not want people to live in poverty on Social Security, supplemental security income, or Social Security disability income. They want people to earn money. And as I said before, you always earn more money if you're working than if you don't, because you can get a job and work for, I forgot the number of months before the 2-for-1 formula kicks in, before you have to pay back $2, you have to pay back $1 for every $2 over you earn. However, if it falls through, you don't have to go through the re-app process for 3 whole years. So you could have a job for 3 years and not to have to fill out that horrible paperwork to get recertified as being eligible for SSI. You also can make up to $69,999.99 per year without losing your Medicaid entitlement, without losing your Husky C. Okay, and that I think is the biggest fear of people working, is that they may lose their healthcare benefits. Ticket to Work, if you get on Ticket to Work and you get on that through BRS, not through DDS and the Social Security Administration, you don't lose those benefits. It's worth it to work. You make more money and you don't lose those essential benefits like healthcare. So I can't emphasize how important that is. And that's one of the life possibilities everybody needs to learn about. So if you haven't made an appointment with a benefits counselor at BRS, I strongly suggest that you do that so that you can explore these life possibilities with a more open mind and not be hampered by that myth that you're going to lose. If I don't know if you are, but I know so many families who are, because I talk to a lot of families all the time, and people, even today, one of the professionals said, oh, but you can't work more than a certain number of hours, you can lose your benefits. And that's the person I jumped on and said, that is so untrue. Fortunately, I was with somebody who backed me up. So it wasn't just one-on-one, but it's so untrue nowadays. There are programs and projects that encourage people to work. Safety and security is a huge issue. Also, we don't want people to be living endangered, but there's personal safety devices. We can look at things like supported decision-making. We can have personal contracts for people to do. We can have automatic bill pay for people who can't manage their own finances. You can have a limited or joint bank account. With one of my kids, I had to have an account where there was a limit that if he went over the limit using his debit card, it shut down. He didn't get charged extra fees for going over the limit. And there are banks that do that. So you have to do some research to find a bank that will do that. But how independent is that, and how much you don't have to count your change? If you go shopping and it's a certain amount on the cash register, you insert all you need to know is, does the receipt match the thing that was on the cash register? That's all you need to know. You don't need to calculate change. You don't need to have all those other skills. If you have a debit card with a limit on it, you can be an independent shopper. How cool is that? Those are life possibilities for safety and security that have to do with funding. I don't know how many of you know about ABLE accounts. With ABLE accounts, you can save up to $100,000 that can be used for disability-related expenses for somebody with a disability without touching SSI or SSDI, because it's not counted in that at all. And you can withdraw from that account as long as you have used them for qualified disability-related expenses. So I've talked to a number of people who run ABLE accounts in different states, and what they say is if going on a vacation to the Bahamas is going to improve the quality of your life, then it counts as a qualified disability expense. Open an ABLE account for your sons and daughters and stash money into it. You can deposit up to $15,000 a year. So you can open an account with $15,000. You can, and if you're worried about the person using more money and you want them to keep their full Social Security benefit, you can actually take that overage and put that in the ABLE account and still get your full Social Security. So the individual's basically doing what a lot of us have to do, just saving money out of our paycheck. You throw it in an ABLE account, it doesn't count towards Social Security.
And Connecticut just started their own ABLE account system.
But you can open one in other states. I've helped a number of self-advocates open ones in like Nevada or some of the states that have it. There's a lot of different rules and regulations. And I would suggest that you do go on the UConn USID website and sign up for the next Bagel webinar, which is going to be on May 6th from 6 to 7:30, because they're going to be talking about financial responsibility, ABLE accounts, and what's the other one? I forgot the other one. One other thing, but anyway, it's good. You should go. If these things are like saying, boy, I wish I knew more about that, that's going to be an opportunity to learn more about that. Citizenship and advocacy, we want people to participate. We want them to join. I think Guardian Angels may not be operational anymore. Is that true? Or are they?
Yeah, we just recently stopped running the meetings.
Okay, so we would like to have you officially join People First of Connecticut, which meets on the last Thursday of every month. And we do training on the second Thursday of every month. So we teach about self-advocacy or whatever other kinds of things that the group decides they want to learn about. So we have all these opportunities for citizenship and advocacy. Volunteering is wonderful. Volunteering is one of the best ways to make friends, because people who volunteer tend to be, I think, better people than people who never volunteer. And I'm not talking about people with schedules that are chock full and don't have time to volunteer. But if you've got people who, go out of their way to volunteer, who work at St. Vincent de Paul's, or who do community gardening, or who do some of these other things, they're more likely to be accepting of people who are different than the average Joe that you meet on the street. So I think volunteering is a great way you give back to the community. People see your competencies, your capabilities. Volunteering is good. It is also a great resume builder before you have a job. So I'm a big fan of volunteerism. Family units need to have support too. You need to have technology that you can access. You need to have peer support. You need to have local support groups. You need to know that your other kids have SIB shops or SIB support groups, new ideas, circles of supports, intensive training opportunities like this. We want to make sure that you're not doing only disability stuff, but that you're talking to other people who are looking at how to make housing more equitable in our communities, because that's going to include people with disabilities as much as it's going to include anybody else. And here's another feature of charting the LifeCourse, which are called buckets for the family. And instead of just providing goods and services to the family, which is what we've historically done, those go into the green bucket. We're not going to take that away, but we want to make sure that families also know that there's two other parts to supporting yourselves. There's the discovery and navigation part, where you get information and you get training and the supports that you need, whether it's about disability or whether it's about any of these valued life options I talked about. And we also want you to be able to navigate those services. So you have the skills to be able to go up to somebody and say, for example, what I noticed you're coming out of a Catholic church. Do you have something that would allow us as Catholics to be able to participate more fully? If you came up to St. Pius, for example, in Middletown to do that, you would probably get referred to me, and I would be able to say, here's ways you can be included in the St. Pius community once COVID's over and we start getting back to the normal swing of things. So, I mean, we've been very inclusive at St. Pius, and so we'll continue to be that because we have it. Connecting and networking. You need emotional supports as family members. So again, self-advocacy organizations for people, parent-to-parent support, non-disability community support. Some people need counseling and professional counseling. I know I did it for many parts of my life. With how the heck am I going to get through this with two kids with disabilities? That was really tough. So I know that I had to get professional support in addition to family support. And then finally, supports and services in the general community. Like, can we do time banks? Can we do human service co-ops? I was working with a group of families they're not in Fairfield County, so they're not a group of families that have lots and lots of money. But what they did was they came up with a time bank to support each other. So one of the fathers was really, really good with carpentry and so on. And in exchange for the other members of this time bank watching their son or daughter so they could get a break because they understood their son or daughter because he had similar autistic characteristics to their own children, he would do their carpentry work for them. And they would bank the money. So if they needed something repaired, he would do it. That would be banked a number of hours that they would then watch his son. And another opportunity with somebody who would do the food shopping for someone. So there's lots of creative ways of engaging a community that doesn't rely on human services doing everything. And here, right down to the bottom, ticket to work and pass are two things that need to be explored as other ways to get people to have real lives. So the integrated services star basically looks at 5 areas for every part of an individual's life or for their life in total. And that's a very important thing with charting the LifeCourse. It looks at personal strengths and assets, relationship-based supports, assistive technology, what community resources are out there, and then lastly, at eligibility-based services. Again, with the idea that it should be those stars scattered around the individual, surrounded by family, surrounded by community, and not the individual surrounded by services, family surrounded by services, prevented from being part of the community. So the integrated services star, which is what's up on your screen right now, the top sort of triangle comes off of that one-page LifeCourse profile. It's specific to things like employment. So you might do one of these for employment. You might do one of these for living in the community. You might do one of these for improving your social life. So those things that are on the one-page LifeCourse profile get put here that are related to whatever you're doing, this integrated supports thinking about. Then you go to the lavender thing to the right, which is what are the relationship-based supports that you can rely on? How can you build up your social networks? How can you get connected back with those people you haven't seen for a long time because you've been too busy raising your family or too busy, whatever, trying to survive with COVID? And we all have a lot of things that we need to connect with. The pink kind of trapezoid to the left is technology, because a lot of people can be much more independent with technology. They don't need the staff, just like Raymond Crease. And there's the community resources. I just talked about some of those, like time co-ops and things like that. What else is available out there? If you can make friends with the guy who runs your neighborhood bodega, yeah, it's going to be more expensive than Stop and Shop, but you also got a relationship with somebody who's not going to rip you off, and who maybe if you do go in there and you don't have your debit card with you and you don't have enough money, will let you still go home with that carton of milk that you really need to eat, because they know you and they know they can trust you. And they also know that you have support people that sometimes come in with you just to check in. So using those community resources, and then as the last resort, using those eligibility-based supports. So instead of having total supports from an agency, total supports from a service system, you're accessing all of these other supports with LifeCourse planning, and you're using the eligibility-based supports when you truly need them. And here's what happens when you use this LifeCourse planning for life schedules. So here's somebody who lived in a group home and had a day program, and this is what their schedule looked like. They maybe had an activity Sunday afternoon. They maybe ran errands with people Saturday morning. It depended on who was on duty. And from 9 to 3, they were in a day program. In the morning, it was the same as everybody else. They had a routine and downtime. And then in the evenings, from when they got home, the same as everybody else, routine and downtime, except for the rare times when the whole clump went out bowling or the whole clump went out to the movies or whatever, even if somebody didn't want to go, even if that was not their thing. This is what the schedule looked like for that person, and it was done within the confines of the service agency that had that original schedule, because they relied on these other resources. So supported self-care and breakfast, encouraging to make their own, independent transportation. They didn't have to wait for the facility van to take them to work because they learned to use individual transportation. On Sundays, their day was filled with faith activities, social community service. They had a game night at home, but they could invite some of the people that they had met in the community and through work to their home to play the games with them. They didn't have to do it with staff and the other people living in the facility. Work, ride, home, they had basically 4 days a week where they were able to work because that was the nature of the job that they had. They had some free time except for chores. On Tuesdays and Wednesdays, there was opportunity for volunteerism to run their personal errands. That's when doctor's appointments and so on were scheduled. They had free except for chores. Again, everything that's free is except for chores. You got to do your chores before you can sit and veg out. Adult ed class on Tuesday nights and a Bible study group with their church on Wednesday nights. Could this person understand what they were talking about with the Bible study? I don't know. I'm not going to bet on it. I'm not going to bet anything on it. But they were out and they were participating with community members who did not have disabilities, who liked them, who talked to them, who engaged them as best they could in that activity. And they weren't sitting at home alone. And then supported self-care and bedtime routines. What a better use of staff, because they didn't have to do all these other things for this individual. So achieving valued life outcomes are very, very critical. And I am almost done, and I'm actually on time, yay. Where we have valued life outcomes are the same types of outcomes we'd want for any of our loved ones who don't have a disability. A place of one's own to call home, family, friends, success as you define it, free time to make the most of, money to spend on things you want to spend your money on through an ABLE account, through whatever else you need, having your human rights respected. Sometimes the hardest part of journey is believing you're worthy of the trip. So that whole self-esteem part that comes from being more independent, being treated, having your choices more respected because they can be better respected, supported decision-making, having diversity celebrated, and the gift of giving back. And all of these things are more feasible if you're employed and earning a living rather than living in poverty. So the whole thrust of LifeCourse is to support these not really new initiatives, but relatively new initiatives to Connecticut, like Employment First, Employment for All, like having a place of your own to call home, like really being fully included in the community. We've been talking about it and giving it lip service for years. I know Mark Community Resources has a vision and a mission that speak to that, but we haven't actually funded those opportunities. And as we're looking toward a new administration, hopefully, for example, the IDEA is going to be fully funded for the first time since it was passed in 1975. That is going to free up local dollars that are currently being spent on special ed to incentivize local employers, local landlords, local everything else to provide some of the natural supports we're talking about here. I'm done. Time for questions. I do need you to do this evaluation, and I'm going to put the link in the chat box if I can figure out how to get over to the chat box. I'm going to get out of here so I can copy this.
And as you're doing that, I want to mention, I know COVID has kind of screwed everything up, but this is just a little overview of the Charting the Life course toolkit. Over at, and I'm going to say it right, the Yukon Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities had a 4-part series that totals about 17 hours. So that shows you how much Dr. Rammler is trying to crunch into an hour and a half. And please let them know if it'll be up and running.
Yeah, so what we're doing right now is we're developing online modules, and I think I'm really so any of you who are spiritual, either pray or send good positive thoughts or whatever, because UMKC may partner with us in developing some of that stuff as online modules, which means instead of giving up 2 Wednesday nights and 2 Saturdays for the 4-part training that Trudy was just talking about, you'll be able to do it at your leisure from your home computer and still have the same things accomplished, which will help with jobs, which will help with you name it. So thank you, Trudy, for letting me do this. So does anyone else have any questions? I can't see anybody other than Bella.
I see a question.
Okay, so you have it view, I don't. With a question, I'm going to stop sharing. So anyway, I'm going to also give Trudy these PowerPoint things so you can send it. But I'm going to send it as a PDF file because
that was the question. That was the question in the question.
That was the question. Well, you have copies of the handouts.
You answered it.
I answered it. Okay. See, I'm psychic too. Just kidding. But seriously, I am the Transition Post-Secondary Adult Supports Coordinator at the USAID. Say it, Trudy, it comes out a lot more quickly. You said. Don't spell it YOUSAID. It's not, it's UCEDD. But the USAID, that's my role there. And you can always call my cell phone. Don't call the office right now. I'm still telecommuting, but you can always shoot me an email because I keep crazy hours and I will try to get back to you. I am allowed to do that because I provide what's called technical assistance to families, which is one of our objectives. It's one of the things that we provide. And I am the technical assistance to families provider. So if you okay, you mentioned this ABLE thing and I went to the training and I don't have a clue where to start. Give me a call and I'll show you where to start. Okay.
Let me just add someone asked if the forms you shared today are the same as those on the LifeCourse website.
Good luck finding them. I'm going to send you the ones that I showed today. I'm going to send them to Trudy. So Trudy will get a copy. Let's see, Trudy's going to get, Trudy, who I've been organizing this with how long? So Trudy's going to, let me write myself a note. You're going to get websites. You're going to get forms. And you're going to get the PowerPoint presentation. Did I promise you anything else? Oh, the website, you're going to get the registration stuff for the Bagel, Building a Great Life webinar series. I knew there was one other thing. Okay, so thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your time. I hope you learn stuff and embrace stuff and can run with it. And don't worry about not knowing everything. It took me a while to become LifeCourse fluent in language. I became an ambassador in 2018, but I've been using it ever since Robin Wood, who used to be my business partner, called me and said, "You got to see this. It's the best thing since sliced bread with person-centered planning, because it puts it all in a neat package and something families and everybody else can wrap their heads around." Have a good night. I don't know if it's still cold out, but I was going to say enjoy the spring. Hopefully we'll have some spring weather this weekend.
Thank you very much
Thank you, Trudy,
for
for
your knowledge and for sharing it with us. And I'm anxious for the next time we get to have a presentation with you. So
Thank you. And don't forget to do the eval. You have to do the eval. Trudy's going to also send the link with the eval if you haven't already
Absolutely.
done it. Okay. We have to have that. Our funder, you're not paying for tonight. That's because our funders require evals. Thank you all. Have a great evening. Trudy, I'm going to
Thank
leave
you.
right now. Okay.
Good
And pull
night.
this stuff
Goodbye.
together for you. Good night, everybody.